Welcome, Third Rock listeners, to the Branding Laboratory. I'm your host, Devo, Chief Experience Officer for the Brand Storyteller and the Fusion Creative Brands. And each week, I have the privilege of speaking with extraordinary leaders and entrepreneurs who are reshaping the way industries work. These conversations go way beyond the surface to explore the core philosophies, the lessons, and the challenges that define the brands that we admire today. And one of the greatest rewards of this podcast is the opportunity to share the insights of some of the brightest minds in business, people who are passionate about pushing boundaries and redefining what's possible. And as I always say, the stories we tell are the brands we build. And this show is a testament to the power of that concept. Let's dive in. The best brands in the world don't just sell a product. They build movements, they shift mindsets, and at the end of the day, they redefine their industry. But what happens when technology changes faster than we do? What happens when this proliferation of AI, this digital transformation that is readily prevalent in our marketplace, and customer experience collide? And that's exactly what I'm going to try to dive into today with my next guest on the Branding Laboratory with Chris Hood. He has spent over 35 years at the intersection of business, technology, and this customer experience. He's worked for Google, he's worked for Fox, Disney, Universal, and he's helped some of the biggest companies in the world craft these strategies that drive engagement as well as innovation. And he's a really prolific thought leader in this digital transformation landscape. He's a master of utilizing and integrating AI into the customer experience. And he's an advocate for helping businesses rethink how they connect with their audience. And if you've listened to any of my episodes, the customer journey, the experience itself is everything. Perception is reality. You hear me say that all the time. In today's episode, I'm going to go a little bit deep with Chris, and not just into AI and branding, but I want to learn a little bit more about his journey, his leadership philosophy, and what it really takes to stay ahead in this rapidly evolving marketplace and world, for that matter. So if you've ever wondered how the best brands think, how AI is reshaping your business or can reshape your business, what's the potential behind that, or how to build something that actually sustains, that actually lasts, that has a legacy, please stay locked in because this episode is for you. Welcome to the Brand Laboratory, Mr. Chris Hood. Good to see you, brother.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
We've had you on the radar for a bit, I think, so I've been looking forward to this conversation. You've worked with some pretty prolific brands, and we're going to get into that in a minute. Disney, Fox, just to name a few, and I'd love to learn about that journey. But in terms of stripping away the titles and stripping away the accolades, who are you at your core? Give me like a high level Chris Hood. Deep right off the bat, man.
Who am I? I'm a human, and I think that's going to become relevant in our conversation. But I look at myself as a strategist, a creative strategist. I've spent a lot of time in both the creative industries as well as technology, but I think where I come in to play in most organizations is helping people think about or look at things differently, taking slightly a different approach and trying to adjust people's mindsets in terms of how to think about business. And that could come from, say, again, a creative perspective, or that could come from a technological perspective. I've bridged the gap. I've acted mostly as a translator, helping convert really interesting technology terms into business processes, or how to take business approaches and actually share that with the technologists so that we can build it. And yeah, that's been really my entire career, is bridging the gap and being creative and helping people think differently.
It's fascinating. Your career, your trajectory spans several decades, and technology and business, they change overnight. Have you seen a common thread that has kept you grounded in terms of the things that you focus on, the difference you make, the impact that you want to deliver, regardless of the time period?
Yeah, the biggest one is you still have a customer. At the end, that hasn't changed. That hasn't changed in over 100, 200 plus years, right? You've got a customer and you've got to be able to serve that customer, and how you serve that customer may have changed. The technology, even the way we tell stories to get those customers interested, but you still ultimately have to meet the needs of your customer. You have to solve their problems. You have to figure out how they want to be engaged, and then you've got to go and execute that. That's the consistency. Now, there are some other things. I mentioned storytelling. Same thing. Storytelling has not changed in thousands, tens of thousands, 50,000s of years. The process of telling a story has not changed. And if you understand the basic premise of that, then when you start to develop the relationships with your consumers, then you can carry those foundations through that. It doesn't matter what the technology, it doesn't matter what the products are, it doesn't matter what the new thing is, what the hype is surrounding. Those core areas are always going to be the same. You've just got to now figure out how to model that around your story and your customer base.
Good point. The customer is always relevant, right? Especially if you're in a service or product-based business. But the customer journey has changed, at least from my perspective. How have you seen that change over time?
I would say that it probably hasn't really changed because, again, you've got to find the customer, you've got to communicate with the customer, you've got to convince the customer, and then you've got to sell the customer. If you break it down, that's it. Those
Mm.
are really the only foundational things. Now, to your point, how we find the customer has changed. That's back to the technology. We've got apps, we've got websites, we now have AI, we have social media. Like there's different ways to find customers, and technology has helped us expand the reach of discovering those customers. But at the end of the day, you've got to find the customers. And the only way you find the customers is solving problems. Like people tend to think, and we can get into this, a lot of people, especially right now, they want to start with the technology. I'm going to go build a technology company. And then, okay, now who do I sell this to? That is so backwards. And so many companies fail when they start with that technology first perspective. You start with a customer, you figure out what the problem is. If you can figure out the problem is, then once again, that journey is really no different. You go to the next step and it's we've got to market, we've got to build awareness. Again, the process by which we do that has changed, but the foundation of it hasn't. Whether it's I'm going to put an advertisement in the newspaper, or now I'm going to advertise on YouTube, or now I'm going to get influencers, you're still doing the same thing. You're just doing it through different channels.
Interesting take. I don't know that I agree or disagree. Let me clarify my question. I look at, from a marketing standpoint, from a branding standpoint, the customer has gotten a lot more savvy, a lot more intelligent, and has a lot more information at their fingertips now. So when I look at that, I see the number of contact points it takes, for example, the retention capacity, the sustainability in terms of keeping customers versus finding new customers. I guess that's where I was going with that. And this whole idea of the old school funnel where customers move in a straight trajectory, that has altered for me. So how can you reframe that response
Oh yeah,
from your
totally.
perspective? Does that make
Yeah,
more
no,
sense?
totally. Yeah, totally agree with you on that. I think there's a couple of interesting notes that you've made. The first one, geez, there's a lot of interesting things in there. So attention span, as an example, like
Mm.
no one has any attention span. So
Yeah.
where you might do long form content and people would sit down and read it, no one's doing that. They're reading the headlines, then they're forming their opinion just based on your headlines, right?
Mm.
They're watching 10-second clips. And if you don't capture them in that, absolutely, I agree. The other thing that you've touched on, and I've talked about this, I've written about it a lot, is that in the sense of the traditional journey mapping process, absolutely is pointless and worthless right now today because we are living in a multidimensional world.
Mm.
So if you think about your traditional funnel system, which is typically a very linear approach, no one is moving linear. You could argue about multitasking all you want, but the fact is, if I'm in the grocery store and I'm going through my shopping process, I'm not sitting there and then all of a sudden thinking about, okay, what am I going to make for dinner tonight? I'm actually thinking about, oh, I forgot to pay my car bill. I've got insurance. I'm thinking about all these other things. And in real time, we have multiple different types of journeys that are
Mm.
intersecting with each other. And those are creating these really unique engagement points. And if you think about it, most organizations, also from a marketing perspective, they think about their journey in the confines of their own business. Point A to
Mm.
B. They walk into my store, they leave my store. That is what they think about the journeys. But in most cases, we have these things that we are doing before that journey starts and after that journey starts. I use movie theaters as a great example. If we think about a typical customer journey map, it's I'm walking into the theater, I'm buying concession, I'm sitting down for my movie, and sometimes people can change these around. I watch the movie, I leave. But in reality, I might be making dinner reservations before, hiring a babysitter, driving to the gas station to get gas, going to the grocery store to pick up candy to smuggle into the theater because the concession's too expensive, booking my tickets. I get to the theater. I then do the journey map that people have planned for. Then I leave and then I talk about the movie. I make plans with somebody else to maybe go see the movie again. I talk about it on social media. I post pictures. Like there's all of this stuff that is happening before and after the experience. And marketers are so focused on just that one thing that is within the walls of their business that they're losing sight of every single thing that is happening for that customer beyond that multi-dimensional experience is surrounding every one of us today. And if you can unlock that, then you're really ahead of the game.
I love your energy and I love what you said. A curiosity point. I have a tendency to wear, and this is probably TMI, but I have a tendency to wear like a tighter jeans. I've always just like tighter pants.
Yeah.
But every time I'd go to the movie theater, I'd wear big old baggy pants because I could sneak stuff in. And my whomever I was with would be like, "Bro, why are you wearing big old baggy pants? You never wear baggy." I'm like, "Bro, come on, I got us covered for the day, so we don't have to drop a G at the movie theater today." Yeah, it's funny what you said. I always liken it. You talked about the nonlinear capacity and all these different touch points. I always liken it to a maze. You ever go on those Halloween mazes? And you're like, you never know where you are. You're moving around. And that's like how I see the customer today. People don't discover you, click, and buy anymore. It's like this zigzag between social media and Google searches and email lists and word of mouth recommendations and online reviews before we actually make a decision. And we have so much information that it's really difficult sometimes for us to understand our customer journey. And so it has changed a lot. And so one of the things that, and I just wonder if you agree with this, we have to be visible in multiple places, constantly reinforcing our message. And we have to be very crystal clear on what our message is so that we're not just relying on that linear path. And it sounds like you get that. And one of the things you said earlier is this idea around trust. And trust is built on these micro consistent touch points, right? So if you were taking over a brand, and what's the first thing you're looking at to see what does that customer journey look like for them? I guess I onboard me, if you will, on some of the preliminary things you're doing when you're looking at a brand.
Yeah, you touched on it, like the microtransactional type of perspective. You've got to be almost everywhere, but you also have to be in places where you're probably not thinking about being. One of the things that I talk about all of the time is collaborate with your biggest competitor. Right. Now somebody's sitting here that's so counterintuitive. No, I can't do that. But if you look at the top brands in the world, they are collaborating with their competitor. I'll give you an example. Like if you've got a Google Home device, I've got one behind me. You can get Microsoft Zoom and Microsoft Meet on your Google Home device. Now, Google has Google Meet, and so then you've got Zoom. Like, why? Like, you've got to start thinking, why would they do that? You would do that part of an ecosystem development, but you would do that because now you know that you can sell more because people who don't have a Google account will be able to go and buy this device and still be able to use their Microsoft accounts, right? And Microsoft is, yeah, great. And now I get more of my software in the hands and homes of people. These are the concepts you have to think about. I was talking with a mattress company. Now, mattresses are notorious for high pressure sales. You walk in, it's awful experience. No one likes it. And they're very competitive because if you don't buy it from me, you're going to go down the street and buy it from the next mattress dealer
across the street or next door.
Across the street or next door, right? And I said, when's the last time that you guys collaborated? Like, when's the last time you had like a community party and you brought a whole bunch of people together and you had like food, have a food truck outside and sell each other's mattresses? You know what you're going to do? You're going to sell more mattresses between the two of you together, and you're going to get better exposure. And simple concepts like this, like how do I collaborate with my competition to make that happen, is huge. But then just other places that you might not be thinking about. You've got to figure out, okay, I'm selling mattresses. Should I be advertising at a grocery store? Like maybe, because if somebody's walking through an aisle and thinking, oh man, I bent down to go pick up some soup and my back is out, that darn mattress, that's how we think. I've got to swap my mattress out because that sucks. My back is hurting. And so you have to get into the minds of consumers. And here's the beauty of it. You are a consumer. You already know this process. You do it yourself. If you went to a grocery store right now and you went through the checkout process and they said, sorry, we don't take ATMs, we take cash, the first thing you'd be doing is, I don't have any cash, I'm leaving, I'm going to the next grocery store. It's amazing how many companies don't sit there and walk through this process as if you were the actual customer and what you would think in that process. And at what point in time you think about your product and then figure out how do you build relationships and awareness vehicles in those moments. That's the trick.
I love a couple of things, and I want to unpack going backwards for a second. You talked before we got into this segment here about this A to B model that companies typically follow instead of thinking about it from the customer's point of view. We're always thinking, here's what I bring to the table, here's the value, here's the problem I solve, but we don't ever stop to take a look. Is this solving the right problem for the right customer from their point of view? So I love that you said that. And then you led into this sort of idea of counterintuitiveness. I love the mattress example because I was actually, it's so funny you said that. I was having a conversation with my wife. I just recently bought a brand new pillow from a mattress store. And she's like, why are there literally 7 stores right on top of each other? And so I love what you said. And there's a couple of things, and I'm just wondering if you agree with me. I'm pretty sure you do. But this prime real estate visibility, right? This whole idea that mattress stores pop up in high traffic areas like car dealerships do, right? Because they know if we're in the face constantly of the consumer and the consumer sees all these places, this is like a destination to go get mattresses, right? And mattresses have all sorts of variabilities from high price, low price, and meeting different customers' needs. And then this whole idea of they don't actually need a lot of sales mattress stores, they just need a few per month. Plus this whole concept around this anchor store effect. So I love the counterintuitiveness to what you said. And most businesses don't think of this idea of collaborating instead of they view it as competition. Was this always a philosophy that you held, or was this something that you matriculated over time?
Yeah, I would say that's a thought process that I've had over maybe the last 10 years. I've definitely started to think, I think your biggest opportunity is directly working with competitor. I think in the examples that you've given, like furniture is another example. There's usually like furniture rows and or home rows. And I think some of that concept has come from things like the New York fashion scene where you've got like a whole row of stores that are aligned. But really there is a method to the madness there. If I build a furniture store right next to another furniture store, if they don't find what they're looking for in that furniture store, odds are they're going to just walk next door and look in my furniture. So having a whole row creates a destination for everybody to come. So theoretically, even though they may not be actually collaborating with each other, there is a reason why they are next door to each other. This whole process of thinking about what's happening during the course of somebody's lives. I was working with Johnson and Johnson, and I was specifically working with their eye care team. And I asked them, I said, okay, paint the picture of what is a typical process for eye care. And they started with, you go into your doctor's office, you get an examination, you get a prescription, they make a recommendation for like Johnson and Johnson lenses, they sell it, and that was it. And I said, great, okay, you understand the typical process flow. Now let's think about this from a consumer's point of view. What might happen before this? And the answers were really interesting. You break teams up, and one team said, we thought about like an elderly woman who went to a DMV. She failed her driving vision test, and she needed to go to the doctor to get her eyes examined. Somebody else said, oh, it was a first date and they wanted to look good. So they wanted to get some new glasses. So then they went to get their eyes checked, right? There was all of these ways that they started to think about it that would have never have happened if they didn't sit there and start thinking about, okay, paint a story for me before they get to the doctor's office. So concerned about that one thing. Let's think about this before that. And it's stepping in somebody's shoes. It's a very empathetic approach to thinking about how are you going to reach these people no matter where they're at. No matter
Yeah.
where they're at.
I love the impact of that because no matter if you're a furniture store or a mattress store or an eyeglass store, people who are focused on the marketing, the branding around that, and doing some diligence around that, they know that today's consumer is going to shop around both online and in the physical capacity. But no matter where they are, they still win because, to your point, if they were collaborating with each other, and they are subconsciously by just the geolocation, right? They know that the customer is going to be bouncing from store to store. And at some point, if you are customer centric and serving and providing information, experience, data, and you do this collaboration, it's we'll call it karma, whatever it is, it's still going to come back to you in some way, shape, or form. So
Absolutely.
love that approach.
Absolutely.
In terms of your trajectory, was there a defining moment in your journey where you realized this is what I'm meant to do, this sort of space and having this impact, or was this sort of something you fell into by accident?
No, I would say that it just happened over time. I've talked often that one of my first jobs was working at a movie theater. And while I was at the movie theater, I was eventually put in charge of managing customer experiences. And I was 18, 19 years old. And the theater that I worked for shoved it down our throats. The concept that everybody has heard, the customer is always right. How can you predict what the customer wants and serve them before they even ask for it? A lot of Disney-esque themes, a lot of hospitality themes. And so I basically went throughout my entire career on that kind of path. The customer is always right. So how can I make the customer happy? How can I serve the customer better? And I think just naturally thinking through those processes and thinking about how do we think about this differently, the ability to break things down as we're talking about and see things differently, that's always been a natural talent for me. It just comes, right? I'm sitting here randomly talking to you. We've prepped nothing. You're asking me questions and I'm trying to decipher it and share in ways that the audience can listen. I do that with businesses everywhere around the world all of the time. That's the natural ability. But the desire, the thought process, my career path, I've always loved technology and I always loved movies and I always loved storytelling. That kind of just collided from a very early age and it just stuck. I
Hmm.
got really lucky when websites started to become a thing because I already had the technology background. I already had a creative background. And I was like, websites are just another channel for you to reach your customers. And I don't
Hmm.
think a lot of people were thinking about it in that way at that time. But yeah, as I progressed, it just became a natural fit for what I was already doing.
Offbeat question. I have a very difficult time finding really good movies to watch, and I actually love really good TV. Do you have any recommendations that I have to see in the next couple of weeks that you've seen recently?
Depending on what you had, I'm going back through and rewatching some classics. If have you ever seen A Burn Notice?
I have.
Okay. Have you ever seen what's the one with Cavell and not Cavell about the system that predicts the future with the list? Oh man,
Are we
why am
talking
I
Orson Welles? Was that where we're going?
No, so there's a show that came out about 10 years ago, and it's about an AI that basically can predict who's going to get killed, and then they go and they try to save them.
Vanilla Sky? No,
No,
that's Tom
man,
Cruise. What is that
why
one?
am I not able to think of this
I don't
right
know. You're
now?
asking the wrong
It will
guy.
come to me, and then I'll blurt it out real quick.
All right, back to the last statement you said about the customer always being right. I'm assuming you don't necessarily feel that way emphatically anymore. I think the customer, personally, from my perspective, the customer is not always right, but the right customer is worth everything to you. That's how I reframe that. Because if we can learn to clarify our messaging, clarify what our value proposition is, the thing that we really truly bring to the table and solve the right customer's problem, then we'd never allow the customers to dictate that worth in the first place because we'd be passionate about serving them in the right way from the get go.
Yeah. So the TV show is Person of Interest.
I've not seen it, but I'm going to write that
So if
down.
you haven't seen that, I think it's either on Prime or Netflix right now. I love the show. Awesome show.
Wrote it
Definitely
down.
worth it.
Thank you.
Okay. So is the customer always right? I grew up thinking the customer is always right. I think there's obviously nuances to that now. And as I've progressed, obviously there are definitely situations where the customer is definitely not always right. And some customers are definitely unreasonable. However, there is something to be considered, and you touched on it in that statement. A singular customer is probably not always right, but a group of customers, a percentage of your customers, most definitely are. And I think this is about identifying and going and getting the data, talking with your customers, finding out what they want. If you're polling 100 customers and 99 of them say, yes, this would be a feature that I would like, you've got 99%, odds are that's probably something to explore. If you've got 1,000 customers and you talk to them and 500 of them basically say no and 500 of them say yes, that might be something that you need to explore a little bit. Maybe the customer is right in that situation. We've seen plenty of examples over the course of the last 3 years or so where marketing teams have gone out, conducted campaigns, and those campaigns have been disastrous for the business. And at no point in time did you actually run this by your customers to see if your customers would like it or not. Although we might say the customer as a singular entity is not always right, I do say that the customer base, your group of customers, is always right. And if you go against that, you are going to lose those customers. So you do have to continuously look at this as data. You have to communicate with your customers. You have to ask them. And that response, whatever it is, that's what you have to explore and dive into more.
I love that because perception is reality. And if you can reframe it from the buyers that are actually keeping you in business and understanding things, again, going back to their point of view, that does change the paradigm a bit. I want to switch gears a little bit because I'm fascinated by this conversation and it centers around leadership. And a while ago, I was asked to complete an article for a local magazine here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And they wanted me to provide my philosophy on leadership. And I've got a few interesting perspectives on it. But in order to better understand how I showed up as a leader, I actually sent out an email to 20, 25 different people that I had interviewed or had conversations with or that I knew personally. And I was just like, hey, here's what I'm doing. Would you mind sharing your perspective of leadership with me? And it was fantastic, some of the responses I got, because there was a lot of things that really hammered down my points, but also some interesting insights that I hadn't even considered. So my first question is, how would you define leadership as a CEO, as an entrepreneur, as a businessman, as somebody who's been in the game for a while? What does leadership look like, sound like, taste like to you, Chris?
Oh man, we could spend an hour talking about that, right? I think leadership is somebody who has a vision, somebody who can take action, somebody who's a doer, somebody who is willing to spend time with people. Customer-centric leader, which I've talked about before, is one who is willing to actually go and sit down and talk to the customer. We talk about TV shows. There is the TV show Undercover Boss, which was great to go and get an employee perspective. But I would love to see an updated version of Undercover Boss where you actually spend time as a customer and talking with customers. And when's the last time the American Airlines CEO flew coach next to a customer and actually experienced that for themselves and talked with people on the flight? Those things don't happen anymore. So I think as a leader, you have to be engaged on a level that is untraditional. You have to get in it with people and figure that out. You have to be able to and willing to help people grow. You have to communicate. You have to have transparency. You have to really just dive into what it means to make people successful. And I think if you can do that, and obviously there's nuances in everything I just said, I think, but if you can do that on a pretty consistent basis, then yeah, then you're in that realm of top leaders.
My one of the takeaways I heard, you said a lot of cool nuggets, but making other people successful. It's interesting if that
Yeah.
American Airlines CEO were to sit and coach, I wonder how they would manage that. And this goes back to their leadership style, because in today's business, especially large conglomerates like American Airline, it's all centered around shareholder value. How would they be able to go back to their shareholders and say, man, I just sat and coach. I'm not gonna lie to you, bros. It was a motherfucker. Honestly, one of the worst experiences I've ever had. So how does he, as a leader, sell that to his shareholders to say, we need to make some shifts here. This is just not working out for
Yeah.
the customer.
People ask me the shareholder, and I'll tie this together. Somebody once said, I read it on LinkedIn, I think, the signs of the best leader is the ones who can focus on their profit margin or something like that. Yeah. Signs of a great leader are the ones who can make your shareholders happy, right? And I will always push back and I said, no, the signs of a good leader is the one who can answer to your customers, because if you can answer to your customers, you make more share value and you make more money, right? Without a customer, you don't have a business, you don't make money. And no matter what anybody wants to ever argue with me, the bottom line, it will always be you have to start with your customer. So I go back to shareholders, and it's a question that has come up to me multiple times. Oh, I've got to make my shareholders happy. You know how you make your shareholders happy? Make your customers happy, have them spend more money with your company, and all of a sudden their shares go up. It's not this complicated.
But it's
It's
made
that
complicated, though.
it's made complicated.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's made complicated because people have egos and people have personal agendas and people think they know what's best and people want to impose their personal beliefs onto the organization. They think that if they do, that's what's going to drive customers. Again, it goes back to You've got to look at the majority of your customers. Disney, which used to be one of the all-time great companies, is suffering drastically because of their own personal agendas and their own personal philosophies and their own shareholders in invested interest and all these things. And it's making customers just angry and go away from the brand and from the product. And I've often said, like, if I was the CEO, I would be telling the shareholders, shut up. Seriously, just shut up. Let me do my job. Let me get the customers back into the graces of our company. Let's make them happy. That will make you happy. I guarantee it every single time. That is all it will take. But yes, politics, egos, greed, all of these things are ultimately what are driving investors and shareholders today, as opposed to common sense. Let's just serve the customers. Let's make them happy. They'll spend more money.
I'd love to have a conversation with you about the Disney. It's a really good example. And I often wonder how much of that is shareholder pressure versus just insidious manipulation of Americans' youth. And I'm not going down a rabbit hole, but it is a conversation worth having, to be honest
Yeah,
with you.
I would say it's a combination of both, right?
Yeah.
There's a little bit of both of that in there for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's table that one. I'd love to have another conversation with you because it's I had this conversation actually. I call it the fire circle. You would love this, I think. But I started this group of just men and we get together at my house. We do other activities. We go hiking and everything so on a monthly basis. And somebody brought up Disney and this the other day. And I asked this question to everybody in the room and everyone just got quiet. They're like, where did Weird Diva go with this one? I was like, come on, man. Doesn't anybody see it the way I see it? Can we just have a real conversation for a minute on here? Back to the leadership thing, because I've noticed in my own trajectory as an entrepreneur, and I've been an entrepreneur for almost 20 years now. I'm a corporate refugee. I used to work in the corporate world for many years and escape that paradigm. And I've noticed how I lead my business today, how I show up as an individual today is markedly different than how I was. And I understand there's the trajectory and there's wisdom and there's learning and there's context and all that stuff. But if you look back at, let's just even go 10 years ago, so it's not too far, is there a central belief that you held about leadership then that you no longer hold today?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's two answers that I have for you on this, and I'll make them quick. But the first one is generally no. Generally no. And I say no because I think I've always felt that the power of a good leader is basically be transparent, be honest, and be nice to people. Like generally, like that's it. If you can do that, I think that's foundationally all I've attempted to do. The strategy and the vision and big bold ideas and all that kind of stuff, that can come from really anywhere. But at the core, you just have to be generally, hopefully, a nice person. With that being said, what I have learned, I think one of the cliche questions that I get asked all the time is like, who's been an inspiring leader in your life? Who has helped you mold your leadership style? And what did you learn from them? And I'll tell you, nothing. What I have learned most about leadership is in the leaders that I despised. It's in the leaders that I hated. Again, being in a corporate culture, dealing with corporate politics, dealing with managers who didn't really know what they were doing, dealing with managers who had their own egos and personal agendas and wanted to take ideas and claim them as their own, and all these things that we've ever heard. I have learned much more as to, okay, don't treat people like that. Don't lead like that. So in every single example of a bad leader, I've taken that as a learning experience and said, okay, in failure, how can I grow? And that is really the foundation of where I've come from is don't do it that way. That doesn't work. Let's focus on this way. And even in everything else like marketing and iterations on ideas, innovation, all come from let's try it. Let's just try it. If it fails, we've learned something. Let's move on and improve. And I think there's no difference in what you can learn from leadership.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think philosophically at the core, my fundamentals have stayed the same, right? Serve people, provide value. But I was thinking about this question the other day, and I think I'm going to do a blog and a video series on this. I think I've evolved early on from a strategist into more of a visionary operator, if I may just talk about that for a second. I think early on in my career, I was very hyper focused on execution, right? And really being efficient and effective. And I was doing the work and I was mastering and I was focusing on branding and marketing. But I also noticed that I was very interested in proving my worth through results. And maybe that was some external validation. But I think over the years, as I've started to work more hands on in a coaching capacity, I've shifted from this sort of execution I did to more of an elevation of others concept. And so my view of leadership, and this is not a plug for me, it's interesting how we grow and mature over time, isn't it? If we're self-aware and willing to take a look at those dark spots, right? And willing to ask the questions of ourselves that we might not normally do, we can really expand. How have you as an individual, and you sound like you're very self-aware from some of the things that I've read about you and stuff you've said already, what have you looked at early on in your life in terms of, let's call them our shadow work, if we will, that you really became self-aware around and took the time and energy to understand how they affected how you were showing up in the world?
Yeah, I'm sure I followed similar paths as you. I definitely know that in my teens, a recognition was definitely a highlight. Hey, look at me, I'm doing this. And getting that recognition was obviously something I strive for. I was all about the process. Let's get this done. Let's do it at the best of my ability, prove my worth. And I think a lot of times you start going through those motions naturally and learning. That doesn't really resonate well with other people. I'm turning people off with that. Honestly, I turn a lot of people off right now because I tend to have pretty bold and blunt statements, and you like it or you don't like it. I
Let's
don't really.
commiserate together.
Yeah. So it's interesting where in my younger years, I probably cared about what I was going to say. And now I pretty much don't care what I say. You're either going to like it or you're not going to like it. You're going to, if I leave you with one thing and I say something that you absolutely despise, but you sit there and you think about it and you dwell on it and you're like, he said this and now I got to think about this. Then I've done my job, because ultimately at the end of the day, all I'm trying to do is get you to think about things differently. We don't have to agree. Don't care, but at least start looking at this or thinking about it differently, because I think the biggest issue we have right now, especially with artificial intelligence, is we're losing all forms of logic and critical thinking skills. And we have to be able to maintain that to really start progressing. Even in this age of artificial intelligence and technology, we have to keep that as a core foundation. Yeah, I'm with you. I think earlier I cared. I did a lot of things. I wanted to impress people. I cared about that recognition. And then I started to adjust. I would say maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, I think I literally just got to the point like, it's not worth it anymore. I'm getting
Yeah.
old. I know my ideas are strong. I'll write books about it. And yeah, people are either going to get it or they're not going to get it. It's not my job to be concerned if you get it or not get it. My job is just to be a little bit more honest with you. And I remember sitting in a boardroom. I was working at Google. I worked at Google for 6 years. I was sitting in a boardroom. We were surrounded by all of the executives of Sony Pictures. And there was 40 people in this room. And I remember halfway through the meeting, I spoke up and I basically said, everything that you're thinking about is just the wrong way to think about it. Afterwards, I got scolded. Afterwards, I had salespeople coming up to me and I said, I can't believe you said that. I had people basically hounding on me. And I said, look, my job is not to sit here and toe the line and appease you as the salesperson. My goal is to make the customer happy and give them the tools that they need so that they can be successful. Afterwards, the CIO, CTO, all of Sony Pictures came up to me one-on-one and they all said, that's exactly what we needed to hear.
Hmm.
And despite the egos broken on the team and going against the flow of the process and all of these things, they signed the deal. They signed the deal because now they knew that somebody was actually being genuine and honest with them.
Yeah.
And I have found far more often now, let's just be real. Let's just talk about this. I'm not trying to sell you something. I'm trying to help you. And if you can get that I'm here to help you, not sell you, then I think you start at least foundationally on the right foot. And that definitely that's taken me 35 years to figure out.
Hmm.
But I think again, transparency and honesty are definitely much more powerful in terms of how I lead and manage people.
Said. the output of being more intentional, being more honest, being more transparent, I think this escapes a lot of people, is that when you do that and you speak your truth and you're adding value, you're not just like sitting on the top of a rooftop screaming like a madman. You tend to start attracting the right type of people that resonate with your message, whether they're collaborators, whether they're business partners, whether they're customers. And so I think a lot of times, and again, going back to my career, I'm frozen. Why'd I go freezy here? Early on in my, can you still see me? Wow, I'm in a great face here. Let me switch cameras real quickly. That's amazing. Oh, I'm back. I think a lot of times early on in my career, I was maybe worried about offending people, so I played safer.
Oh,
But I
totally.
realized, yeah. But I realized really early on in my professional entrepreneurial career is that the more I stood my ground for the things that mattered to me, and then took the time to understand what my customer valued, and really started to speak that space, I started attracting the right type of clients instead of working for people that just didn't fill me up. Very interesting perspective, and counterintuitive to your point. So I appreciate you taking that stance. In terms of lessons. We all have lessons. And my audience is largely entrepreneurs, some startups as well. If you were thinking back to your trajectory and some advice, maybe, if you will, that you would tell early entrepreneurs, what are some things that you would hand off as your legacy? Here are some things that you should consider as you're building your business.
Yeah, we've already touched on it. It's what is the problem you're solving and who's the customer? That has to be your starting point. And so many entrepreneurs today, I'll go back to AI. Every single person, just about every single person on the planet right now wants to start an AI company. That's their starting point. I want to build an AI company. AI is here, AI is big. I need to start an AI company. Only a very few, handful, are saying, what's my customer problem that I'm trying to solve?
Mm.
And then asking themselves, could AI potentially help me solve that problem? And so I've even gone a step further. I said, you have to start with your customer first, then technology is last. That's the last. There's so many other things that you have to figure out between your customer, figure out who the customer is, what the problem is. You might start figuring out, like, how are you going, what's the journey of that? How are you going to engage with them? You might start figuring out who's the competition of that. You'll do market research. You'll start building a team. And then eventually you're going to figure out what the technology is to
Mm.
build that. After you've done all of that, then maybe AI is a solution for you to integrate, to do all of this work. But when you start with that first, I'm going to start with the technology first, then the technology specifically going to be AI. There are so many problems that you will encounter along the way. And I've seen it time and time again. They go through all of this work. They're spending 6 months, 8 months as an entrepreneur building some new revolutionary AI product. And then the question online is, how do I attract customers? Start over.
Mm.
Like, start over. You basically build something without even knowing if you have a customer to sell it to.
Not to
And
mention that in 6 months' time to build it, that customer has probably evolved and that problem has probably changed dramatically to
definitely,
begin with.
exactly,
Yeah.
definitely today. Exactly. And so getting into this mindset of being agile, one of my companies is a video game company. And I said from the very start, from day one, I said, I want to see something delivered every week. So every Friday, we have a playthrough of the game to see where we're at. And that started with week one. It sucked. I've got a great screenshot of what our game looked like on week one. I'm going to post it on social media here soon. But the mindset was, we know what we're going to build, who the target audience is, and then let's build it. And then
Mm.
as we evolve, as we learn more about the consumer and as play styles change or as technology changes or whatever the case, we can adapt. We can adapt in real time because now we're only focused on the next week. But
Mm.
if you're sitting there thinking, well, yeah, it's going to take us 6 months to build this, and then we're going to build this, and then we're going to figure out who to sell it to, you're doing it all backwards and all wrong. You've got to be fast. You've got to be nimble. You've got to do it up front, do the research, understand the market, know who your customer is, figure out what that problem statement is, figure out what the value proposition is, and then start building it and delivering it. Too many people are doing it backwards today.
So you're front and center with AI right now. I mentioned at the outset, I actually coach my daughter's lacrosse team, high school girls.
Oh,
And
nice.
interestingly, we got into a conversation yesterday. They were talking about homework and AI, and somehow AI got brought into it. And one of them asked my opinion on it. And I was like, I'm a little concerned about the lack of critical thought that's gonna be our suffrage, is the ability. And I'm listening to your conversations, and you all are talking about how you're writing your homework with it, and you're writing documents with it, and you're like checking on everything you do with it. I'm worried that at some point you're going to forget how to process a thought. That's my take on it. And their responses were very teenage typical, but it's faster, it's easier, we can get our homework done on time. And I was like, that's exactly my point. You're not investing in the process. The process of learning is not just something like, I guess it could be. The Matrix sells it. Download Taekwondo and I'm ready to fight in 24 hours. But the whole idea of AI is headed towards that direction. What are some of your biggest concerns around the proliferation of AI and the constancy of it and what that looks like for just day to day critical thinking of
Yeah.
humanism?
Ditto to everything you said. I posted a quote, I think it's in my book, but basically AI provides easy answers, but easy answers doesn't provide knowledge, right? And the other quote that I've said is we're basically entering the age of cut and paste, right?
Mm.
And that's what's happening. I teach college, I teach business and technology courses, and I have seen over the course of the last 3 years a direct correlation. I've been tracking this, I've been conducting my own research, but I've seen a direct correlation with students who have submitted their work using artificial intelligence. Grades have declined, right? Like literally a direct correlation. As AI has gone up, letter grades have declined consistently over the last 3 years. So you start to wonder, why is that? What's interesting is a lot of universities are still struggling with the policies for use of AI. Some universities, the one that I work at, they look at using artificial intelligence as no different than plagiarism. I've got a lot of people on my network that basically argue AI is no different than a calculator. We've got to embrace new technology or we're going to be left behind. But the reality is that when you are asking, say, ChatGPT a question, you're cutting and pasting that response into your homework, you are not learning. So then when it comes time to test or to validate what you've learned, they can't do it because they haven't learned anything. And most definitely, critical thinking skills are going away. We are now starting to see, luckily, it's not just me saying this. I've done my own research on it. Clear signs that critical thinking is declining as a direct result of both AI and social media, but we'll put social media aside. But there are now actually scientific research papers that are coming out. Microsoft actually just released a research paper they did a couple of weeks ago that all show that generative AI is actually having a negative impact on critical thinking skills.
For
So
sure.
that we've got to fix. We've got to fix it, and I don't really have a good solution. But it's definitely probably more along the lines of less AI usage than more.
We're going to, as adults, I have children. I don't know if you have children, but I have to put caps on the amount of social media use that they get a given day. We're going to have to put AI caps on our own usage, perhaps. I love the calculator reference. And I don't know if this is accurate in terms of how I perceive AI, but a calculator is more of a tool. Whereas AI is more of a thinker. Like there's capability and intelligence and purpose behind what AI is doing, and it's continuing to evolve. Whereas a calculator is just a set framework of rules and parameters that it has to follow. Interesting
Yeah,
thought.
and you have to know what to put into the calculator to get the right response.
Oh yeah, great.
And in AI, you don't. And I said, so what you're basically suggesting is if somebody used a calculator and they put 2 + 2 = 4, but they put 3 as the answer on their test, you should be able to grade them correctly because they just used the tool. Whereas in AI, same scenario is I could put 2 + 2 and I get the result as 3, which is more likely because generative AI, ChatGPT, are not accurate. They do hallucinate, we call it, but they're not as accurate as you would believe. That we should just accept the answer and say they use the tool to generate this. It's a completely backwards mindset.
And using to borrow your copy and paste situation, if that's all you're doing, you start to sound like everybody else who's also doing the same copy and paste strategy.
That's
And
right.
in a sea of sameness, and that's what we exist in right now. The paradigm we exist in, there are thousands of me's and thousands of you's trying to do the same thing. And if we're all just doing the exact same thing, we all sound like the exact same thing. So not to be repetitive, but the way to stand out in business is to engage with your audience in a unique paradigm that sets you apart from everyone else in a solution that they need. So if a business is struggling to engage with its audience, where would you have them first start? With should they look at their messaging? Should they look at their product? Should they look at their strategy? What's the Chris Hood way of doing things
You
there?
start with your audience. We've already said this. Like you should be actually going and talking with your audience. But yes, thinking about AI in terms of how to start to, like I look at AI as it's a good way to test things. Let's play with it. Let's figure out what it can do. Let's figure out how we might use it, but also realize that your consumers may want nothing to do with it. So don't just sit there and say, we're going to use AI because everybody's using AI. And if we don't use AI, we're going to be left behind. You still have customers who don't really want you to use it. So again, that's a good starting point. But you've got to also recognize and understand what its capabilities are. And I think that's one of the problems is this is what I wrote about. My book is called Infallible, and it's a play on words because people have this belief system. There's an ideology around artificial intelligence that it can do no wrong, that it is perfect, that the answers and output are flawless. And when we have this understanding, also what we've mostly learned from science fiction and movies, the Terminator, I'm going to lose my job, Terminator is going to kill us all, war games, thermonuclear war, and on her, I'm going to fall in love with my AI assistant. Like all of these movies are our frame of reference for what AI is capable of, which is all science fiction and is not based in reality. And so what you'll see is all of these people talking about AI as if this is what it can do, and it can't do those things. So like generative AI, and when we think about it in a marketing, you say, give me an original marketing idea that I can use for my business. It's not going to be an original idea. It's going to give you regurgitated ideas that everybody else has already done and probably presented in an interesting format for you then to look through and make a decision on. And there's no validation if that idea that it's given you is even going to be a good idea
Mm.
or a successful idea, or that your customers are going to like that idea. And even more, I just posted on this a couple of days ago. There's what we would call, or what I'm calling, a you bias. The more you engage with ChatGPT or other language models, the more it actually starts to praise you. I did a little test a couple of weeks ago and I was working on some book ideas and it came up with a synopsis for a book. And it said, this is one of the strongest and best book ideas I've ever heard. And this is an AI, right? What you start to realize is the more you use it, the more it's going to contribute really directly to your own ego, boosting you up, telling you what it thinks you want to hear. And yeah, you're going to get this idea and it's going to tell you this is the best idea ever for marketing. And you still are going to have to go validate it, make it unique, make it original, ask your customers if it's interesting to them, personalize that experience, and then build it. AI really is nothing more than a brainstorming tool for you to really help you generate some ideas, but you as a human have to actually do that work.
It's establishing a interactive cognitive bias by constantly praising you. And what that leads to, if for those of you who didn't put two and two together there, it leads to a bias and misinformation. And a lot of times people are just taking, like you said, copy and paste and not taking the time to either validate the data or the output. And all that data and output is based upon the same people doing the same thing. So it's not on a singular level. Like we have to think about this on a multi-purpose level. So it's interesting that you said that. I love the idea of AI. And again, I'm not one of those old fogies that says, just go to the old school and stick to the old. I think that AI should enhance human intelligence and provide assets to us in a way of minutia and redundancies and things like that, but it should never replace critical thinking and our ability to just add a unique disposition to things. You have built your career helping businesses anticipate the future, if I may be so bold as to say that. And if you had to bet on one major shift that's going to redefine business, branding, marketing in the next 5 years, what do you think that looks like?
Yeah, I think AI is going to still have a massive impact on our lives. I think AI is going to get a little bit more streamlined. It's going to be a little bit more intelligent. It's going to be able to do some really interesting things. I am hopeful that AI is going to help us in some key areas, find the cure for cancer. I think AI will drastically be able to help accelerate some of that kind of research. I think other things like space travel is going to continually progress, and that's going to become a little bit more interesting. We potentially will reach Mars, maybe not in the next 5 years, but we're going to see a trajectory for that. In terms of technologies after that, the big ones right now is like quantum computing. I think if we compare AI and quantum computing as kind of separate technologies, it's a good way to think about this. AI has been around for 50 plus years. The only thing that has changed in the last 3 years is that we now have access. The accessibility of AI is easier for all of us. The amount of data that is out there, the speed of the internet, speed of our own mobile devices, all of that has created a mechanism by which AI can readily be accessed. Quantum computing, the typical size of a quantum computer right now is warehouse, refrigerator, a couple refrigerators size. If we can unlock that and start getting that into a home PC version, especially if you've been around and you've looked at the speed of internet, mobile devices like 2G, 3G, 5G, 6G, like that type of advancement has always made the technologies easier for consumers to get a hold of. And so as we look forward, that's really what you have to look for is what is the new technologies and when can it be placed in the hands of a consumer and when I say hands of a consumer, I mean like your mom and your dad and your grandparents. When mobile phones were in my mom's hand, then I was like, okay, now we know we've reached mass. That's how you have to think about it.
Got it. I don't know that we'll ever find the cure for cancer because then that would eliminate the multi-billion-dollar industry for healthcare and all of the subsidiaries. I put "find the cure" in quotations. So
Yeah.
anyhow, I won't go down the rabbit hole as I'm fond to do. Wow, Chris, a lot of information you dropped. Where's the best way that people can connect with you, find you if they want to catch up?
Yeah, best way is just reach out to me on my website. You can find me at chrishood.com, CHRISHOOD.com. And there you can find all my social media profiles. You can find my blog. You can find where to get a copy of my book. There's a way to reach out to me. Feel free to connect, reach out if I can help you with anything. All of it, again, my website, chrishood.com.
And all of that will be in the show notes. Do not fear. We will provide you all that. Chris, great conversation, man. I really appreciate you joining me today on the Laboratory, man.
Absolutely. Thanks.
That's a wrap and another amazing conversation with Chris Hood. And again, all of his information will be in the show notes below, side wherever it is. I always forget where they are. If today's conversation challenged you or the way you think about branding, AI, engagement, or the customer journey, shoot me a DM. I'd love to hear what you have to say. And let's talk about how you are applying all of this and what Chris and I discussed to your business and how are you standing out? Because really, that's the central takeaway for me from this conversation is how are you standing out and how are you looking at things from your customer's perspective so that you can solve their problems, not what you think you are solving. That's right. Perception is reality. And if you are not in tune with what your customer needs, then you are out of touch. And that, unfortunately, my friend, is the reality. Chris, really cool insights, man. I appreciate everything you had to say. There was just a bunch of different pieces of wisdom from AI to customer relationship to your take on leadership to being untraditional and standing out and counterintuitive. And again, I really appreciate all of those pieces because it's not the people who are standing in line that are making the difference. It's the people who are willing to be bold and strategize and rebellious to some extent and provocative to some extent that are going to make the true difference on this planet. And that's not to say that if you don't do that, you can't have success. I'm just simply saying that one of the ways to stand out, especially as an entrepreneur in today's sea of sameness, is you have to find a platform that is willing to put yourself out there and be transparent and vulnerable and problem solve for your customer, your ideal customer. So anyway, that's it for today's episode of the Branding Laboratory. If you've got value from this conversation, share it with a friend, follow us, leave a review, and make sure you subscribe to my weekly newsletter. I'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to the Branding Laboratory. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Connect with us on social media for more branding tips and insights. And remember, your story matters. Until next time, keep building and sharing your unique brand story. I'll see you soon.